I Am is a very, very ambitious episode of Lovecraft Country, anchored by Aunjanue Ellis's masterful performance. She gives a lot of very, very subtle acting, and I was entertained for the whole episode, but I can't help but feel that the journey that they took this character on could have used a little less empowerment and a little bit more of an actual struggle for the main character to go through. Now, Hippolyta travels to the far reaches of the universe, but the important thing that happens to her over the course of this episode is that she goes on this journey of self discovery. And I appreciate that they took this opportunity of having this character go through a lot of different fantasies, meeting different heroes that would have been very meaningful to her, participating in battle, going through very, very interesting sci-fi locations that were very, very impressively mounted with elements of Afrofuturism. And I felt like all that was very good, but I appreciated that they brought it all around to her emotional journey, which is kind of shown in the way that they titled this episode I Am, that ultimately, no matter how far she journeys out into the universe, it's ultimately about her personal journey and her personal growth, realizing the restrictions that she's placed on herself. And all that is very, very powerful. And as I said, I was entertained the whole time. But to me, I feel like this episode has the same problem that A Wrinkle in Time had, which is that ultimately, in its eagerness to empower this character of Hippolyta, I feel that perhaps it doesn't allow her to struggle enough. And what I mean by this is I feel that they first establish that she's a genius and she solves the problem of Hiram's Ori pretty quickly within the episode. Now, granted, I don't think we really wanted to sit there and watch her struggling to figure out this contraption for too long, but I feel that having her do it very quickly, again, it didn't really give us much of an opportunity to see her struggle with something. Then she goes and gets sucked into all these other dimensions, and basically this just played in some ways like a music video from Katy Perry or Beyonce, which there was a funny Beyonce reference this episode with the character that is listed in the credits as Serafina, aka Beyond Cest. But to me, like, all these adventures that she went on, they were entertaining. They were really interesting to watch. But basically all that happened is, so for example, she met Josephine Baker, right? She goes and dances with her on stage. And at first, she's, not able to participate in this burlesque show. And granted, if you threw me or any person in the middle of a burlesque show, they probably wouldn't perform very well. But then she gets talked to by Josephine Baker, who basically says, "It's okay, you're still amazing, you'll do better tomorrow." And then without, really showing her struggle to learn this, and granted, this was a short episode, so they didn't really have that much time to do this, but without showing her practicing this routine or really struggling to learn it, they show her suddenly able to participate in Josephine Baker's performances with her. And Josephine Baker, for whatever reason, just seems to be fascinated by Hippolyta. None of the other characters, just her. Now, granted, this wasn't necessarily supposed to be reality, but it seems to me that this was way, way too easy for her. And what is she really learning here? She's really just being afforded opportunities to do whatever she wants. And that was kind of how I would argue this whole episode went down. It was just opportunity after opportunity for Hippolyta to get to do exactly what she wants to do and to be told how awesome she is. And I get that can be, it was entertaining, but to me, you have to give a character struggles in order for a story to really be a story. If everything just kind of happens to them and around them and makes them feel good about themselves, then where is the story? Now, I understand the appeal of this. I feel like we oftentimes I oftentimes, in particular, probably underestimate how nice it is to see a character that looks like you in a show or a movie, and have them getting to be treated not just respectfully, but treated as someone powerful and someone that's worthy of being the protagonist. That's something that I'm not trying to be dismissive of at all. I think it's awesome that Lovecraft Country has continually managed to do this. But to me, this episode needed to have a little bit more actual conflict to make the journey worthwhile. Now, there were, as I said, some very interesting sequences when she joins up with the Mino, which are an all-female militant group that was in Africa, and they were often referred to as the Dahomey Amazons. So you kind of see how this group kind of could have inspired Wonder Woman and other, those types of comics that we are very, very familiar with. And it actually had it kind of brought to mind John Carter a little bit. But then it became a little clearer that this wasn't intended to be just a trip into reality. This must have been some kind of alternate reality, because the group ends up fighting a bunch of Confederate soldiers. And this right after Hippolyta tells Josephine Baker that sometimes she just really wants to kill white people. So this sequence, again, though, was illustrative of my big problem with this episode, in that it felt good, but she got trained by Sue Bradshaw from Sue, who played Sue in Veep. She gets trained by her very, very quickly in a montage, then goes out and is instantly not just a warrior, but the lead warrior of this group of women. And then she gets zapped out of there before the group that she's in gets slaughtered. So again, they kind of skipped over all the hard stuff just to have the empowering part where she decapitates the Confederate soldier, which admittedly was awesome. But my point being, there was really no struggle here. It was just her getting to be a warrior, which is, I'm sure, very cool and very empowering and very satisfying to watch. But it's not really good storytelling per se. As I said, it feels like an empowering music video more than an actual episode of a TV show. I did think that there were a lot of lines delivered by Aunjanue Ellis this episode that were very powerful and very powerfully delivered. I liked her line. I feel like they found a smart way to lynch me without me ever finding the noose, noticing the noose. And I think that, this episode thematically was showing how the character of Hippolyta has throughout her life not allowed herself to use her full potential. She's wasted her genius. She hasn't taken the opportunities to be all that she could be. And part of this is the societal limitations that are placed on her as a black woman in the 1950s. Part of it is even in her relationship with her husband, which we get to see her have a conversation with her dead husband in an alternate dimension where apparently he's still alive. And I was glad that they didn't villainize him here, because clearly he was a good husband and he never intended to keep his wife from having her own sense of identity, from empowering. He never intended to keep her from being all that she could be. But without meaning to, he may have somehow contributed to that. And I think it was good that he apologized and then got to go with her into this very, very well-rendered planet. And I liked how they did the 50s sci-fi costumes. I thought that was very, very cleverly done. And just very joyous sequence showing, these black characters in a setting that you never got to see black characters in 50s television. So that was pretty neat. And I really did think that the costumes and the set designs this episode may have been some of the best in the show. I liked all the cameos that they had this episode. They had, obviously, Frida Kahlo showed up in the club. She was the person on the stairway who gave the speech about artists. And then you had Bessie Stringfield, who is someone I was unaware of before the internet told me about her. There were some other interesting things this episode. Obviously, we see Tick have a pretty harsh reaction to finding out that his father is a gay man. And I think that this has more to do with the realization that this was what caused his father to abuse him physically growing up. That his father had this anger because he was a repressed gay man. And I don't think that it's so much that Tick is homophobic, although, in fairness, I think that it would be realistic for him to feel that way at this time. And I appreciate that Misha Green doesn't shy away from showing these characters as they actually would be. I think a weaker writer would try to sugarcoat the rough edges of these characters, but to her credit, she doesn't do that. And obviously, you have the revelation that Letty might be pregnant based on her reaction to the garlic. There's one other thing that stood out in this episode as being kind of ridiculous, and it's that Tick was able to make the journey from St. Louis to Mayfield, and he doesn't have a car. And they've already established how hard it is for black people to travel across the U.S. at this time. So for him to make what would be like a 7-hour journey, according to someone online, for him to make this journey that quickly in time to rescue his aunt was kind of ridiculous and honestly kind of unnecessary. I think that they could have had her get out of this situation on her own somehow. Now, these Kansas cops were in league with Captain Lancaster. So at first my reaction was when they killed them, I'm like, why are they killing these cops like disposable Marvel henchmen? But I moved on quickly. But this show definitely has a way of having not characters, but, people die and then not really dealing with it too much, or dealing with the fact that the main characters killed them, as that was the case last episode. They didn't really deal adequately with the fact that Tick killed this woman last episode, and I would argue this episode, the fact that these two cops were killed kind of got glossed over. Lastly, of course, there's probably going to be some trouble down the line because Diana's homemade comic book got left at the scene of the crime, so to speak, underneath the body of the dead policeman. So that could cause Captain Lancaster to come after Hippolyta and Atticus and Letty. So that could be trouble. So this wasn't really what happened in the book. They changed the story substantially, and I think I might have personally enjoyed it more if they had followed the book more. But it was a very, very entertaining episode. So those are just my thoughts. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. If you'd give me a like, I'd appreciate it. And as always, you can watch more videos right now.